Yes, it's John G. Sutton here. Tales from the jails. I want to talk today a little bit about violence against notorious inmates. I recently saw an interview with Sean Atwood and an ex-prisoner who was quite openly explaining how he had physically assaulted an inmate called John Venables. Now, John Venables was the one of the two boys that abducted and murdered the little boy called Bulger. Yeah, remember that? It was about 30 years ago, wasn't it? Anyway, this particular inmate that Sean Atwood was interviewing said that he'd been advised by a member of the prison staff that John Venables was on the wing, and that as he was the cleaner, he'd get the opportunity to go and give him a beating. Now, he went on to describe how the prison officer offered him to pay him money to do this, which is, I've never heard anything like that, but I mean, if the guy said he did it, then maybe he did. But it's extremely unusual, let me tell you that. But I have seen prison officers arranging for inmates to be assaulted. But let me first of all deal with the case of this John Venables assault. This prisoner, who shall remain nameless, interviewed by Sean Atwood, who is not nameless, by the way. He runs a true crime broadcast on here on YouTube channel. You must have a look. There's a number of interviews with me when Sean Atwood there. But anyway, and of course he published my book with his publishing company. He has a publishing company called Gadfly Publishing. That's published my book, HMP Manchester Prison Officer, yeah. Anyway, he was interviewing this inmate. The inmate went to say how he was unlocked by the prison staff and allowed to wander, because he was the wing cleaner, allowed to wander the landing, and they unlocked John Venables, and he went up and gave him a beating. Yeah, said he hit him in the head. I don't know what he hit him with, but some kind of thing that he was carrying smashed him in the face and knocked him to the floor, and left him on the floor in a pool of blood. And this was done by this inmate, supposedly for revenge from society, one of these vigilante kind of beatings, which I personally don't agree with myself. I feel that if an inmate's been sentenced to imprisonment, then he's entitled to serve that term of imprisonment in a reasonably safe and secure environment. Certainly not allowed to go free, but the punishment is imprisonment. The courts don't sanctify abuse, and to attack an inmate or to allow an inmate to be attacked like that is not only abuse, it's a dereliction of duty. And obviously, with the inmate being prompted to attack John Venables, there was a conspiracy to commit a criminal offence. The offence being actual bodily harm, which is what Venables sustained. It isn't acceptable, in my opinion. At Strangeways, there was a particular officer, a senior officer actually, who had a cleaner that he appointed the cleaner, but this cleaner acted as his like a hitman, and he used to direct the cleaner to go and administer beatings. One lunchtime I was on duty and I saw this particular inmate, and he wasn't on his own wing. He was actually located on it was D wing. He was on D wing. That's where he was, the cleaner. But I saw him on A wing, so I followed him. But I was on the ones, saw him on the threes, that's the third landing up. Went up. By the time I got up to the threes to see what he was doing, he'd gone in and beaten this particular prisoner. He dragged him into the recess and had beaten him. He was out of there. It didn't take him very long. He was a muscular man. He wasn't a giant, but he was a muscular kind of individual. But he was acting as a hitman for this senior officer. It's quite unacceptable. I did speak to the senior officer and say, I've returned your hitman back to his cell, because I took him back to his cell and locked him in. I said, and I believe that I didn't witness him beating this man. I just found the man in the recess, badly beaten, bashed about the face, They do some horrible things, But anyway, so I got the inmate back to his cell and alerted the medical team that he was coming down, because he wasn't going to bleed to death. But I alerted the hospital staff that he was in need of attention, so they would attend, hospital officers. I wasn't a hospital officer at the time. And went to see the senior officer and said, put your hitman back in his cell. Oh, I know nothing about that. I said, well, that's not what he told me. He told me that you'd sent him. And that same senior officer, one lunchtime, I was working on D-wing, and he said to me, no, don't unlock that cell. He said he's on a food-free diet. Really? A food-free diet? Yeah. He wasn't feeding this man. That was his... He crossed his path or something. So that was his idea of punishment, to put somebody on restrict their food, I thought it was diabolical. But who do you complain to? Norman Brown was the governor, and he ruled the regime that he thought was fit for purpose. It probably would have been absolutely fit for purpose, but in the rule of Queen Victoria, I think, not Elizabeth II as it was. So I'm not going to sing to you today, but I'm going to play you a little episode from my book, which is concerning a celebrity inmate, and he was a celebrity inmate, been on the television, international TV, internationally known. He was a former minister of the Labour Party. He was in the government with the Labour Party, and he was the last Postmaster General, and he was a prisoner at Wormwood Scrubs, had a heart attack and was transferred from the prison into Hammersmith Hospital, which is next door to the Scrubs, by the way, on Duquesne Road. So I was in charge of I was a hospital guard for ex-minister John Stonehouse, and this is the chapter in my book, chapter 18, part of the chapter in my book, which details my experience of dealing with John Stonehouse. It's read by Alan Turton, and it's in the Audible audiobook version of HMP Manchester Prison Officer. So instead of a song or a poem, I'm going to play you this, and you can actually get this book on Amazon. Here we go.
We said the prisoner was former Cabinet Minister and member of the Privy Council, Mr. John Stonehouse. I was not too concerned who he was really, but I asked the officer why he thought this was problematical. He still thinks he's in charge, the officer said, so good luck with that. There'd been rumours in the jail that Stonehouse was pulling a few strings to get his own way. I'd been hearing about his chess games with a certain governor, so he'd managed to arrange preferential treatment. Also, John Stonehouse had demanded the workshop radio be tuned into BBC Radio 3, the classical music station, as he objected to pop music being played. I could see a slightly amused look on my colleague's face as he turned to leave me in charge of this potentially difficult inmate. The prisoner was just waking from his sleep, and I recognised him as the former Postmaster General John Stonehouse. His face had been all over the news on TV and in the press following his faked death by drowning in Miami, Florida, USA, where he'd left his clothing on a beach. The reason being that he'd fraudulently transferred all the funds from the private bank he owned into his own accounts elsewhere, stealing hundreds of thousands of pounds. He'd subsequently done a disappearing act and was caught almost by accident in Australia when police searching for Lord Lucan stopped Stonehouse by mistake. So I knew quite a bit about this prisoner and his history as a high-flying politician. All that, though, made no difference to me. I was there to ensure he remained in custody, and that was that. I took a seat at the side of his bed and began reading the book I'd brought with me, Captain Swing, by Eric Hobsbawm and George Rood. Stonehouse did not say anything at all to me as he received his medication, followed by the serving of breakfast. In fact, I noted that he was deliberately doing his best to ignore the fact that I was there. The nursing staff appeared attentive, more so than usual, I thought, and he was all condescending, supercilious smiles. It would have been around 10 a.m. when Stonehouse turned to me and, in a certain tone that I must admit carried a neutral authority, said, "Officer, could you collect my copy of the Times and get me a bottle of Lucozade from the canteen?" I had to hand it to him. This guy actually thought he was addressing his own personal assistant, and did so in a manner that almost made one want to do his bidding. Almost. Politely, I corrected the mistake Stonehouse had made, explaining as gently as I could that he was, in fact, a prisoner and I was his jailer, not his fetch-me-carry-me slave. So, no, I would not be collecting his copy of the Times or bringing him a bottle of Lucozade. There followed what may be described in a romantic novel as a rather strained atmospheric silence. Stonehouse quite clearly had been accustomed to giving orders to the prison officers guarding him and expecting them to be obeyed. I could see he wasn't happy about my refusal to wait on him, and I observed a definite flicker of disapproval as I reminded him of his current status as my prisoner. I was reading about the agricultural workers' uprising in the 1830s following the intervention of threshing machines that made many land workers unemployed when I saw Stonehouse motioning the ward sister. She came over to the opposite side of his bed, and I faintly heard him making a complaint that I'd declined to collect his newspaper, etc. The ward sister appeared disturbed by what Stonehouse had said to her, and she almost marched round to my side of his bed, put her hands on her hips, and gave me a short lecture about how all the other prison officers had gone to the canteen for John Stonehouse, and it was my duty to do the same. Now, I knew precisely what my duty was in respect of the prisoner in the hospital bed. My duty was to ensure he did not escape from lawful custody. This I carefully explained to the ward sister, and to better help her understand, I showed her my warrant card and advised that in the event that she attempted to obstruct me in the commission of my duties, I would arrest her. This was, I succinctly advised, a Home Office production to hospital, and the prisoner was my charge, not in the charge of the hospital. I gently pointed out that she should immediately get about her duties and cease at once from interfering in mine, as to do so constituted a criminal offence. For all I knew, she could be a party to some devious, cunning plot to spring Stonehouse from jail by distracting his custodian. Whatever her reason was for inappropriately approaching me, she now had her answer. The look of shocked surprise on the ward sister's face was something to behold. She stood there, fuming, thunderstruck. If I'd slapped her with a wet fish, she could not have appeared more startled. I suspected that no one had spoken to this woman in such a direct way for a long time. Obviously, she wasn't getting out enough. Stonehouse, who was listening to this insidious exchange, pulled a petulant, sulky face, then turned over in his bed and looked the other way. Ignoring the glowering nurse, I picked up the copy of Captain Swing and returned to my sociological studies. It was around 11 a.m. when an officer I knew from the scrubs walked onto the ward and approached me. "You've been ordered back to the jail. I'm your replacement," he said, and I could see at the far end of the ward the sister was glaring at me. Back in the scrubs, I reported to the detail officer and was advised that the CO1 wanted to see me. We met a few times before, and I was not so far impressed with the way he performed his duties. Inside his office, I was treated to a loud and bombastic lecture on how we at HMP Wormwood Scrubs had to maintain a good working relationship with the nursing staff of Hammersmith Hospital, and how I had just jeopardised this by upsetting the ward sister. By this time, the CO1 was really getting on my nerves. His apparent lack of understanding of the regulations concerned me, so when he'd finished telling me what a cunt he thought I was, I told him exactly what the law stated. This was becoming really tedious, and I suspected I was wasting my time, but he needed to know he was wrong. The Prison Act 1952, paragraph 13, section 2 states, a prisoner is in legal custody when outside a prison but under control of an officer of the prison. I then asked the CO1 if, in his opinion, in the case of John Stonehouse on the hospital ward, who was the officer of the prison, was it me or was it the ward sister? Get out, Mr. Sutton, he grunted. I was beginning to doubt the sanity of this man.
Indeed. I think they were bloody insane. Anyway, that's in my book, which you can get on Amazon, folks. This is Tales from the Jails.